At first, it looked like a corridor. A perfect corridor. Endless, luminous, impossible to place in any building on Earth. The walls pulsed in blue and red like a heartbeat trying to remember the shape of a machine. The patterns kept shifting, sliding over one another like thoughts refusing to become words. When I first saw it, I thought it was a trick of the eye. Then the corridor blinked. Not the lights, the corridor itself. For one frame, the tunnel looked deeper than it should have been, as if the video had opened a mouth inside itself. I leaned closer, and the colors changed again. The reds dimmed. The blues sharpened. The geometry tightened. And with it, so did my breathing. I was supposed to analyze the footage for anomalies. That was my job. Detect compression errors. Measure motion instability. Flag any optical irregularities. But there was something wrong with this video from the start. It did not behave like recorded footage. It reacted. The deeper I stared, the more the tunnel seemed to arrange itself around the shape of my attention. Then I heard it. A sound buried under the static. A voice, faint and calm, saying my name as if it had been waiting on the other side of the image. I paused the video. The corridor did not stop. The patterns kept moving, slowly shifting through the frozen frame, as though whatever lived in that tunnel had no respect for time. That was the first moment I understood. This was not a place being filmed. It was a place filming back. The file came from an abandoned research group that no longer officially existed. They had called the Project Lattice, though no one in the office knew what the letters stood for. The only thing attached to the transfer note was a warning in a human resources font so polite it felt obscene. Do not watch alone. I watched it alone, of course. At the center of the tunnel, the geometry created a strange illusion. The path seemed to stretch forever, but not forward, inward. Like distance had been folded into a ritual. Every few seconds, the colors changed in a sequence too deliberate to be random. Blue, violet, red, gold, then back again, as if the tunnel were cycling through moods. That was when I noticed the first impossible detail. The reflections on the polished surfaces were delayed. Not by milliseconds, by memories. For one brief moment, I saw myself in the wall not as I was, but as I had been years ago, standing in a hospital hallway holding my mother's hand. I had not thought about that night in a long time. Yet there it was, inside the corridor, reflected in a surface that should not have known it. I shut the video again. This time, the voice returned louder. "Don't stop here," it said. My throat tightened. I checked the audio timeline. No spikes. No hidden track. Nothing. I rewound, and the same words came again, but slower now, as if someone were speaking from behind a glass wall. "Don't stop here. It notices when you hesitate." Then the tunnel darkened at the edges, and in the center, a shape began to form, not a person, not exactly. More like the idea of one being assembled from light. I should have deleted the file. Instead, I opened it on a second monitor and watched both screens at once. That was a mistake. The moment the image split across displays, the tunnel changed. It was no longer just a corridor. It became a decision. On one screen, the blue light sharpened into cold precision. On the other, the red spread like a wound. And between them, the tunnel seemed to choose a version of itself based on where I looked. Every time my eyes shifted, the structure changed. That night I began testing it. I placed a pen beside the keyboard, looked at the screen, then looked away. When I turned back, the pen was in a different position. Not on the desk. Inside the video. At first I laughed, because fear often wears the mask of stupidity before it becomes terror. Then I saw my own hand appear at the edge of the corridor. Not a reflection. A hand. Mine. It pressed against the inside of the image, fingers spread against the invisible barrier, as if the space behind the screen had become too thin to contain me. I pulled back from the desk so hard the chair hit the wall. On the monitor, the corridor kept moving. And then the voice returned, no longer soft. "You keep calling it a video," it said. "That is why you are still outside it." The tunnel's colors changed again, faster now, and with each shift I felt something in my head being gently rearranged, not pain, exactly, but revision. Like a memory learning a new owner. By the third night, I stopped trusting my apartment. The corners looked too clean. The silence looked staged. Even the clock on the stove seemed less like an object and more like a witness refusing to testify. I took the laptop into the bathroom because the walls there were thin and familiar, and because I was no longer sure whether the corridor needed space to grow. I played the file again. This time, the tunnel was different. Wider, deeper, and in the center of its moving patterns, I saw markings that looked almost like text, flashing too fast to read. But every few seconds, one phrase held long enough to burn itself into my mind. You have been here before. I felt something crack in me then. Not sanity. Certainty. The kind of certainty you get when a locked room suddenly smells like your childhood home. I remembered a hallway from when I was 9. Long flickering. Blue emergency lights. My mother crying behind a door. My father saying, very calmly, that some places are built to keep a person inside until they stop remembering who put them there. I had spent most of my life believing that memory was a museum, that the past sat still if you did not touch it. The tunnel taught me otherwise. Memory is a machine, and the corridor was not showing me the past. It was using the past as a blueprint. Suddenly, I understood why the shape felt so familiar. The angles were wrong for a building, but right for a thought. The tunnel had been built from the architecture of attention itself, each color change, each movement, each impossible reflection designed to guide the mind deeper until it stopped distinguishing observation from participation. Then the voice came again, but this time it was my own voice. I froze. The sound coming from the speakers was identical to mine, but older somehow, worn down at the edges, as if it had crossed a distance I had not yet survived. Listen carefully, my voice said. You are not watching a corridor. You are being measured by one. The tunnel brightened, and for the first time, I saw that the moving patterns were not decorative. They were responses. Tiny adjustments. Corrections. The corridor was reading my fear, my focus, my hesitation, and reorganizing itself around those reactions. Like a living equation. On impulse, I asked the screen, "What are you?" The answer arrived through the pulsing red light at the far end of the tunnel. A figure stood there now, too distant to be human, too centered to be an error. It wore my posture, my stillness, my history, but not my face. It was assembled from all the versions of me I had failed to become. Then it spoke without moving its mouth. I am the part of the world that has to change when you refuse to. I could not breathe. The room around me felt wrong, as if the walls had gained a second layer and were slowly sliding out of alignment with the first. The screen flickered, and for a second I saw something behind the corridor. Not machinery, not code, but a vast seam in reality itself, stitched together with light and repetition. The tunnel was not a passage. It was a stitch. A practical illusion built to keep the world from tearing where perception had already begun to fail. And I realized with growing horror that the reason it reacted to me was because I was not merely looking at it. I was one of its support structures. I did not sleep. I kept replaying the file, searching for the moment the corridor started knowing me, and each time I watched, it became more personal. The colors sharpened around my memories. The geometry bent toward my regrets. The tunnel was not mapping the room where I sat. It was mapping the inside of me. Then I found the hidden note. It appeared only when the image slowed to 1/20th speed, buried between two frames where the blue light crossed the red in a perfect diagonal. There, for less than a second, a sentence was embedded in the structure of the tunnel itself. The viewer completes the path. I stared until my eyes watered. The phrase repeated in my head with the force of a confession. Not the viewer observes the path. Not the viewer understands the path. Completes. A sound burst from the laptop speakers, sharp and metallic, like a door locking somewhere deep in a building I had never entered. The corridor on screen surged forward, and I felt the room tilt. My desk vanished. No, not vanished, replaced. For one sickening instant, my apartment became the tunnel. The walls stretched into a mirrored passage lined with blue fractures and red pulses. I was sitting inside the image now, or maybe the image had been sitting inside me all along. The figure at the end of the corridor began walking toward me. Each step changed its shape. Male, female, child, Old man. My mother. My father. Then me again. Every face it wore was one I had lost. And with every step, the voice became clearer. You think reality is what remains when the eyes close, it said. But reality is what survives being witnessed. It was close now. Too close. And when it reached the edge of the screen, it raised one finger and touched the glass. My monitor cracked from the inside. After that, I stopped recording with cameras. Cameras were too honest. They only captured what was there. But the corridor was no longer interested in what was there. It wanted agreement. I wrote everything down by hand because paper still felt older than whatever was happening. I drew the tunnel from memory. The angles were wrong, then right, then wrong again. Every time I tried to sketch the center, the page seemed to resist, as if my hand were being guided around something that could not survive being named. At 3:11 a.m., the lights in my apartment changed. Not dimmed. Changed. The same blue-red pulse as the corridor had begun strobing through the walls. I heard movement behind the bathroom mirror. A soft, patient shifting, like something on the other side adjusting itself to my presence. Then the voice returned one final time. It was no longer coming from the laptop. It was coming from the room. Now you understand, it said. I turned. The mirror showed the corridor instead of my reflection. And standing at the far end was me. Not a duplicate. Not a hallucination. A version of me that looked like it had already made the decision I was only now approaching. Its eyes were calm in the way drowning people imagine the surface must be calm. It pressed its hand against the mirror from the other side. The glass softened. Behind it, the tunnel stretched on forever, but I no longer believed it led forward. I believed it led inward, into the hidden seam where reality keeps its stitches. My reflection smiled first. Then I did. And somewhere deep in the corridor, the lights changed color, as if the world had just accepted a correction it had been waiting to make. If the corridor is still moving when you finish this story, do not look away. It only becomes a tunnel when it knows it has been seen. And once it knows that, it starts looking back through every version of you that ever existed.